okay?
All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming to our special event celebrating the release of 3 new Cornerstone Press titles. Before we introduce the writers and their work, press director and publisher Dr. Ross Tangadal would like to say a few words.
Good evening. My name is Ross K. Tangadal, director and publisher of Cornerstone Press at the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point. And I'm pleased to welcome you to the launch of 3 of our newest nonfiction titles. This season, The Next by Casey Knott, Lessons in Geography by Philip Sterling, and Points of Tangency by Scott Russell Morris. Tonight, you will have the chance to listen to the authors read from their new books, as well as discuss their writing strategies and stories with our sales director, Sophie McPherson. But before we get to that, I would like to thank a number of people for their support of the press in various ways. Executive editors Jeff Snowbarger and Frisia McKee, editorial director Brett Hill, and senior editor Ellie Atkinson. Ingram Lightning Source, our distributor, Chancellor Thomas Gibson, Provost Levon Cornell Swanson, Vice Chancellor Pratima Gandhi of UWSP Financial Operations, Dean Josh Hagan, Carrie Hutton, and Carrie Zielkowski of the College of Letters and Science, Assistant Dean Tobias Barsky of the School of Humanities and Global Studies, Chair Rebecca Stevens of the Department of English, as well as the entire faculty and staff of the department, Lindsay Cheever and Samantha Petch of the School of Humanities and Global Studies, Ihor Bartoszewski of the university's IT department, Carrie Hebler, Brittany Kaminsky, and Mies Vang of University Communications and Marketing. Robin Spindler, Kathy Stedel, and their staff at the Point Print and Design Studio. Sue Fisher and Ava Hathaway of UWSP Facility Services and Central Stores. Katie Horn of the UWSP Store and Text Rental, the Bookshop Co-op of Stevens Point, and Bound to Happen Bookstore of Stevens Point. It does really take a village to run an operation like this, so we're so appreciative of all the support we receive in various ways from all of these different partners. But our press would not be possible without the energetic participation from our diverse student staff, comprised mostly of English majors and minors at UWSP. Thank you to all of my student staff for doing the hard work of publishing with professionalism and excitement. I would especially like to thank our current executive staff, managing editors Ava Nielsen and Paige Beaver, production director Allison Lang, media director Ava Willett, sales director Sophie McPherson, and sales manager Madison Schultz. So finally, I wish to thank Casey, Phillip, and Scott for entrusting us with their excellent work. Tonight is a celebration of their writing, and so congratulations on the publications of your books and your entrance into the Cornerstone Press family. So now I will turn it over to Sophie, who will guide us through the remainder of the evening. Thank you all for coming and for supporting Cornerstone Press. Thank you.
It is my privilege to introduce our special guests for the evening. Casey Knott, the author of this season, The Next, is the author of Groundwork 2018, a poetry collection, and runs Blue Stem Coffee Roasting Company. Her work has appeared most recently in the Prism Review, Gulfstream, December, Contemporary Verse 2, The New Territory, the Westchester Review, Cimarron Review, and Sugar House Review. She lives on an urban farm in Des Moines, Iowa, with her husband and kids. Also, Philip Sterling, author of Lessons in Geography, is a poet and fiction writer. His books include Mutual Shores, In Which Brief Stories Are Told, Amateur Husbandry, and Local Congregation. He is a recipient of a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship in Poetry, 2 senior Fulbright lectureships, Belgium and Poland, a Penn Syndicated Fiction Award, and artist residencies at Isle Royale National Park and Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore. He lives in Lowell, Michigan. And finally, Scott Russell Morris, author of Points and Tangency, is a writer and enthusiast. He's a mixed media artist, zinester, and a board gamer. He is a native of California, now living in Iowa, where he is an associate professor of English and creative writing at Cornell College. He is the creator and editor of Magpie Zines. Each author will read a brief portion of their book, which will be followed by a Q&A and book signing immediately after. So without further ado, please welcome Casey Knott.
Thank you. Hello. Thank you. Thank you, Sophie, Ross. Thank you all for coming. It's been really great working with Cornerstone Press, I might add. And I'm honored to be reading with Philip and Scott over here. I started writing my book actually when I had a pack of coyotes kill a large portion of my chicken flock. And normally I'd written poetry, so I was like, I'm just gonna write this story down. But it was just gonna be, just a short piece about our loss, became a whole book once I started reminiscing on how we had gotten there. I had met the love of my life, we blended our family, we turned it, we found a little acreage, we turned into an urban farm. And so the book moves between the themes of family, garden, chicken husbandry, and our DIY projects. And because I'm a poet first, I included a dozen poems throughout that correlate with the writing in the hopes that readers would come to appreciate poetry more and see how accessible it is by getting a glimpse on the things that inspire it. So without further ado, I'm gonna start with the piece that started the book, The Flock. A gathering of feathers first, the pile of them belonging to a barred rock, the remainder of our old rooster's lineage, nestled in a circle astride the driveway when the kids and I returned from the store. Now chickens lose feathers. They molt, they drop them when startled, and I thought nothing of it when I saw Bang Bang, that's the name of a chicken, perched on the lip of my flower box a few feet away. But then I noticed the quiet, how Bang Bang seemed frozen still, how Olive didn't dash out to greet me as always, and that quiet grew large. I rounded the house and headed straight to check the coop where I found Thumper, my turkey, alive and broody in the nesting box, along with our black sex-link Stony, but no other chickens in sight. We let the dogs out and immediately knew from Luna's frantic nose to the ground, whining, zigzagging all over the yard, following a scent that some animal had happened. I found the body of the driveway feathers on the path to the creek 100 feet from where they'd fallen. For the next few hours, Fisher and I, with Luna, would scour the woods, snagged by stickweed, brushing poison ivy, stuck with cockleburrs, hollering and panting, searching for the 8 other missing chickens. We found our buff Orpington prints submerged in the creek's bend, one wing missing from the struggle. We found the one remaining rooster hatched mixed breed chicken stiff under a bramble of branches at the back edge of our property line. We found clutches of feathers, knowing exactly which bird matched them, all of the property, like some dot to dot we were trying to put together to reveal the larger picture it showed. We took to the back bike trail and spotted a few more. Thumper's best pal, Lucy the Fourth, likely gone. Not a lick of olive. Miraculously, after hours of searching, Frenchie appeared in the neighbor's yard, clucking, startled, but alive after escaping yet another attack. You wonder why the rest didn't see fit to jump the fence and hide, to find high ground. 5 bodies were missing and 3 found dead. With those kind of numbers, it had to have been a pack. Fisher and I tracked coyote prints in the soft mud of the creek, and he, old soul, visited with a neighbor who confirmed he'd seen a few coyotes that day stalking across his back acre. You want to hate those wild dogs, but they live here too. This land is just as much theirs, and at the end of the day, we're all just passing through. What can we do but learn and grow from it, hope, and do better still? Not many tears have been shed for the countless losses over the years, aside from that first, as the flocks came and went and our connection to them dwindled. But this group hit square in the chest where the heart does its singing. There's a bit of numbness that follows, a bit of kicking like it were a rock in the way at the wonder of why these chickens couldn't find safety. They can fly a bit, so why didn't they fly to higher ground to get away from their assailants? Why didn't they follow Frenchie with her hard-earned foresight to jump the fence and hide in the neighbor's woods? The hardest thing is keeping Thumper and the chickens caged. They want to forage, to splash in the cool dirt on the hillside, to roam the grounds and stretch their wings to free range. It's not natural to be caged, and frankly, Thumper deserves to live her best life. Yet I can't always control the harm in the world, and I want to keep them safe, so it's hard to reconcile. How does one explain to a bird that caging them is for their own good, when really it's for my peace of mind? It's a lot like having kids. You know they need to explore the world in order to enrich and understand themselves. You know they're not yours forever, but you are always saddled with worry for their safety, wanting to hold on to what bit of time you're given for as long as you can. At a certain point, we all must let go, come what may. All we can really do is teach them well and send them out, hope the world is kind to them. So here's what you do. Keep them locked in, safe for a time. You forgive the coyotes for their instincts and let the dogs out longer, that their presence might send the predators another direction, much farther away. In fact, you frequent the outdoors even more, passing the buried remains of your favorite flocks, only letting the birds out to free range when you know you'll be there to keep watch, which you do time and again. And then bit by bit, the edges blur. Uncertainty will always be uncertain, and no amount of fencing or dogs watching or wishing will draw the conclusion. We try our best to be sure, doing our part based on what we know and what we're given to make it so it's easier on them. But there comes a time where you have to let things grow where they are. So that was the start. Here is a To Renew passage. Strange, the things left behind in homes. Baby teeth found in drawers, nudie magazines, and Polaroids circa 1970s stashed in the drop-down ceiling of the basement family room. Strange that you can live with somebody and pocket so many secrets, think you're the only one with a place to hide them. Beer cans in the attic, and throughout the garage ceiling, a nude calendar, a worn copy of the true crime novel The Menendez Murders, a stash of notes, grocery and to-do lists with the phone number for the abuse hotline scribbled in the margins, and a marital counseling questionnaire with several responses written in bold, underlined, hate divorce, start over, all he does is hate, hate, hate. I won't speculate on who stashed what where, as there's been more than one owner of this house, and also, those aren't my stories to tell. But I will say my breath caught when I read those secreted words. I held space for the author of them, their message, a kind of haunt I held in my hand, and I sent light and love and honored them at every remodeling project, removing the hate, hate, hate with love, love, love. Here, Matt and I were adding to what we found left behind, the baggage of two divorcees starting over, histories clipped, a trailhead yet unnamed. Other surprises we found, black mold behind the wall paneling, the kitchen plumbing dropping in my hand as I went to inspect a leak, the lower kitchen cabinets not even being attached to the wall, and the countertops not affixed to them either. In fact, every faucet leaked, and worst of all, so did the gas line. The oven didn't work, the washer and dryer were a ticking time bomb. Every wall, every ceiling had 2 layers of drywall, so installing new light fixtures and switches required extra spacers just to get them aligned. We had no business being plumbers, electricians, carpenters, tilers, and installers, but watch enough YouTube clips and you start to feel like an expert. At night, we'd sit in the mouth of the garage with worn muscles, with splintered fingers and bruised knees, and look at the dark lawn plotting our garden space, the fruit trees and berry patches to be laid, the landscape to work and the animals to fetch. We were exhausted, but we never tired. Such is the adrenaline of having a dream within reach. All right, this next part is a to blend section, blending our kids. As Thoreau once remarked, all good things are wild and free, which I've come to know is true in gardening and homing and loving. Sometimes the best we can do is let things be, to see it grow, and just sit in that enjoyment. Having kids that divide their time between homes, accepting that sense of vulnerability is crucial. Being a mom is hard enough with all the guilt we place on ourselves, wondering if we're doing enough and doing a good job raising these tiny humans to be healthy, adjusted adults. Add the fact that your kids aren't home to tuck in every night means 2 things happen: guilt for the wonder of what you're missing, and also the unintended but real shaming from other non-divorced parents when they imply that they don't have the luxury of catching a show on a Tuesday night because they always have their children. It's weird. And it can be a draw to go over the top planning activities for the kids to make up for lost time, especially when they start rattling off all the things they did at their other house. Those are breeding grounds for the sense that parenting is a competition, intended or not. Here's the thing, it gets easier in time. You survive when you stop taking things personally. You thrive when you remind yourself of the simple truth that no one and nothing will ever change the fact that you're their mom. When they're not with me, I utilize that space to delve uninhibited in my writing because I'm not one thing in this world. And I also have this Midwestern stubbornness that wouldn't otherwise give myself a break, for the world is full of people with harder roads to tow. How can allowing myself time to be quiet and soulful, free of guilt and need, not ultimately make me a better example for the kids, one that encourages them to nurture their dreams? It's not a competition. What the kids need is stable ground, love, and support, and for me to be me, the very best version. Hadn't all of our plantings given some roots? Hadn't our weathering with tired muscles and busted knuckles and lessons not made us more sure and ready? Hadn't we found each other, dreamt up this home? Hadn't I discovered that life is one part what you strive for and one part what you accept? I'm not going to lie, it feels like a gut punch or a spirit deflating when the kids come home with stories that include their other mom, but it changes nothing. I am their mom, and the fact that they have more people in the world to look after them and love them only serves to enrich their sense of belonging here in the world. Okay, last section, and then I'll end with a short poem. And this is a to grow section. To grow. Every year I try to grow pumpkins, and all I ever have to show for it is one or two okay ones come October. The vines are massive, spindling out in all directions. No matter where I plant their seeds, their shoots will reach the garden fence, will climb right over, will claim the other beds. Squirrels are the hardest on them. Every morning, new claw marks, new bite marks, so that by the end of the season, only a few plump fruits remain. It's a lot of real estate they acquire. But I can't help but try, as I'm a sucker for autumn. The dried spice of leaves, the warm bursts of color, the apple picking, the cooling of stars, wood smoke from a campfire. We close the garden too, roots pulling away, dry as a bone. The stalks and stems tossed into our compost heap to break down, become better soil. We add our old chicken bedding there, corn silk and leaves. We've learned our plants do best in raised beds filled with composted soil. Even then, not everything grows. We'd given up on broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, onion, garlic, and beets because they never grew to the right size. And the thing is, the space they took or the time it took to seed and water, all for a few handfuls of skimpy specimens, just wasn't worth it. I could go to the farmer's market or to any grocery store and buy a bag of these items for less than it took to grow them. There's a kind of refining you realize gardening, that is, to see what's worth it. The older I get, the more I see how true that is for life. I used to think an abundance of friends, of things, or trips and activities was better, that there was a kind of success to be found in that overflowing. But those schedules fill up the calendar, and it's hard to sustain any one thing or give it due diligence when you're pulled at the seams. Nope, less is more. To live by that is to discover and have space to nurture your strengths, to grow what best you can. There are plenty of people out there who can grow those things I can't, and who excel in ways I could never fathom, never even want to. So why not be our best version and share in the rest, the lot of us filling in for the spaces we lack? I can grow all manners of berries, tomatoes, potatoes, cucumbers, squash, and beans, and maybe someday, pumpkins. All right, this poem is titled, Forgive Everyone Everything. The bony fox that killed your favorite chicken and dragged it to its den where a litter of mouse nipped and fed and fed. Forgive the mosquito for being a mosquito at dusk after heavy rains. Even the asshole swerving his jacked up truck while he thumbs his phone, a bumper sticker that reads, "No airbags, we die like real men," slapped on his tailgate, just like his father used to do to his mom. Baby boomers, the 80s, especially yourself back when. Forgive us the day so that we might be always arriving, a worry no heavier than a loose shirt. Thank you.
Those were absolutely wonderful. And next up, we have Philip Sterling.
I'd like to thank Ross and all the wonderful people at Cornerstone and the people at, I'm sure the administration at the University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point probably has something to do with the fact that they exist, so I would thank them as well. I was fortunate enough to grow up in Michigan, lower peninsula of Michigan, and so I have the good fortune of being able to show on my hand where I grew up. So lower Michigan looks kind of like a mitten, right? We call ourselves the mitten sometimes. And while I was born down here, I grew up here, and it was a number of years ago, so it was pretty much rural. It's, you know, the Traverse City area is now much different than it was back in those days. But that was, growing up in that place was instrumental in where I'm now as a writer and poet and recovering professor. So I'd like to read the title essay out of this book, Lessons in Geography. The title essay is called A Lesson in Geography, oddly enough. And it's a good example of what happens in the book. The book kind of moves back and forth between memoir, growing up in rural Michigan, and kind of how ordinary poetry is, not poetry in an ordinary life. Poetry has always been kind of a part of my life, and it's infused both my life and my well-being. So this is called A Lesson in Geography, and it quotes from a poem that was in my first book. The title is A Widower Tells Other Passengers Where He's From. The hand is a lesson in geography, claims the speaker in my poem. A widower tells other passengers where he's from. He's from Michigan, and so in response to the typical follow-up question, where in Michigan, I picture him flattening his right hand against the thin membrane of his personal space, fingers together but thumb slightly extended like a kitchen mitt, the gesture that's second nature to all native Michiganders who travel beyond the Great Lakes. Here, he'd say, stabbing with his left hand index finger approximately where his hometown is located on the palm of his upraised right hand, the anatomic metaphor of our state's geography. Or the black backside of the left, the poem continues. Forested with pine-like follicles along knuckled hills and shoreline, veined with purple interstates. I imagine he's a retired farmer who has somewhat reluctantly began to travel at the behest of his wife, recently deceased. Traveling was something he'd always promised her they'd do eventually, though they neglected to take the time from the seasonal demands of his occupation or in the healthful years of his wife's home economics, household management, and mothering. Then, when she grew older and ill, he'd promised they'd travel when she got better, but it never happened. Now he joins third-ager tour groups visiting the most foreign places, those not likely haunted by the ghostly memories of a homestead and life together. He travels out of loneliness and guilt, out of grief. And it's at one particular instance of his geographical identification of home, demonstrating to a cluster of college alumni on a cruise ship in the Mediterranean, say, or to an American couple he encounters among a wash of pigeons at Venice, that he considers his hand more objectively. This is from the poem. Notice in particular the extremities. Thumb calloused by the hard-held farm, blunt and bruise-ruddied as a sugar beet. Or the wounds and healings, the jagged scars our lumbered dunes have scoured. In the academic year of 1992-93, when I taught as a Fulbright lecturer at the University of Liège, Belgium, I'd found myself repeatedly locating my hometown of Big Rapids, I taught at Ferris State in Big Rapids, on the palm of my right hand. And it says here, just so, but I can't do it and hold the book at the same time. In one instance, I meant to promote the topographical awareness to my third-year American civilization students. In another, the gesture satisfied the curiosity of suburban Waterloo expatriates who were hosting a Fulbright reception. More often, mapping my hometown on my hand was simply a way of pandering to the casually intimate, friendly face in a foreign crowd tourist we'd encounter during our continental meanderings. It was a gesture of second nature to me, a Michigander, a native Michigander, who had engendered the handy visual aid during multiple orientation icebreakers at various colleges in the United States, a practice most Americans could not imitate. For the Nebraska and Kansas classmates I'd met one year at Hastings College, for example, or the Kentucky and Georgia natives I'd studied with from our 3 years at Center College, or the Buckeye-bred Ohioans at Bowling Green State University, where I finished a PhD, there was no part of the body one could use to point out the location of Americus or Grand Island or Bellevue. The fact is, every time I trace the map of my right hand, I am more astonished by how my anatomy duplicates the expansive waterways and landforms of sand and copper-rich rock that were left in the retreat of the last local glacier, which gave up what we now call Michigan about 11,000 years ago. If I cut my right hand loosely under a small stream of rainwater, the runoff will follow my lifeline east to west, the route of the Muskegon River, until it empties off the shore of my palm, where Lake Michigan should be. A crease below that leads west to east along the path of the Chippewa River and into the Saginaw, which feeds the bay I've created with the space between my thumb and forefinger. Back across the state and slightly north, at the base of my little finger, there is a Platte Lake-sized gap between the fleshy pads of that small digit and my ring finger, and I can easily make out the Platte River as it wends its way past the Water Wheel grocery store and Miller's canoe livery and along Benzie State Park to its mouth, which, during spring thaw and smelt dipping, would be raucous with waiter, splash, lantern hiss, net slap, and curses. Just there, on the outside of my palm, below where the dunes hunched like a sleeping bear, somewhere south of Empire, I have an inch-long scar that I acquired from the time we lived at a cottage on Platte Lake. It is one of several, in fact. Another, a small, whitish, lumpy nub, which may still harbor a fragment of storm window glass, pegs Lansing, just east of the center of my grasp. To the north, Mackinac City is an obvious smudge on police blotters, a thickly sliced heel-over on my middle finger. A lengthy, narrower scar runs down the Lake Huron shore of my index finger like a circle tour highway, while a crimp of skin the size and shape of I-275 circumnavigates where the greater Detroit would be in the southeastern corner of my palm's heel. Even below the wrist of my state line, a fat bulge of hairless flesh rises like a surprise of white hills somewhere along the Indiana-Illinois border, halfway between Indianapolis and Champaign. Many of these landmarks, or should I say handmarks, are the consequence of adolescent recklessness, youthful rural sporting in the days before cable TV, slot cars, or 8-track tapes, let alone videos, Nintendo, or cell phones. They are memorable in the way punishment is, especially when one is punished for a wrong he didn't commit. Like the day I shoved my hand through the glass of a storm door. As with most trauma, the details of what led to that incident are less clear than those of the aftermath, yet I've always felt family dynamics and birth order are partially to blame. When my brothers and sisters and I totaled 6, the father off to war gap between Margaret and Richard, third and fourth child respectively, had created a situation where we were, for all practical purposes, 2 families, 3 older siblings and 3 younger. In that respect, I was not only 5th of 6, but the middle child of the second wave, 3 boys, Richard older and Kenny younger on either side of me, and a half generation younger than my sister Judy, the middle child of the first wave. By the time we'd moved to Platte Lake in the early 1960s, my oldest brother Robert was already married and serving in the Army overseas. Judy was attending Kalamazoo College, and Margaret was in high school. During my formative years then, except for summers and holidays, we children were pretty much just the three boys and often referred to as such. As such, we were a handful. I wouldn't necessarily call us wild, not like the three delinquent Sullivan boys up the road, whom we pretty much tried to avoid except for Cub Scout meetings and that one BB gun fight in the woods by the logging trail when Richard took a hit above his left eyebrow, nearly got his eyes shot out. But we were boys, after all, intended to give our babysitters and our sisters' boyfriends moments of aggravation. The night in question was one of those nights. Margaret recalls it as a sore point in her relationship to Dad, since she'd been left behind to manage our heady resistance to bedtime while he and Judy, home from college, had gone fishing. I remember only that we were either told to stay in the house but went out, or were told to stay out and snuck back in. And that we were using for our ins and outs not only the front porch door and the back kitchen door of the gray clapboard cottage, but the low, loose screen windows of our bedroom as well, which you could take the screens out and climb in and out of the window. Whatever the initial circumstances, the game eventually became one of tease and rout, in and out, with Margaret the woeful target, the it of three rambunctious boys. In a kind of tag or hide and seek or queen of the cottage, Margaret was trying to capture us, and we taunted her by running past as she corralled one or two, but she couldn't get all three. At some point in our game, as I was racing to get into the kitchen, launching up the back steps, I must have underestimated my velocity, for when I reached the storm door, which Margaret had perhaps locked, my right hand crashed through the glass. I screamed and yanked my hand back out through the shattered glass with an immediacy I've since witnessed only in video reversal. Poor judgment on my part, to be sure, as the exit likely caused more damage than the entrance, but it hurt. I remember a lot of glass shards and blood on the threshold and hemp doormat, on the kitchen linoleum in the sink, blood that my sister couldn't at the time stomach very well. My sister eventually became a nurse. But at the time, she was not good with blood. Bleeding that couldn't be stopped. Since Margaret could not yet drive, nor could she leave my brothers unattended for any length of time, she phoned our Aunt Sue, a health and physical education teacher certified in first aid, who rushed over from my grandmother's cottage down the lake and transported me to the Frankfurt Hospital. I received the first stitches I'd ever gotten in what I learned to call quirky. 4 stitches went into my hand at geographically the same relative location as Frankfurt is on Michigan's mitt. It's right about there. 4 others went into my wrist, where the skin had pulled open enough to reveal a bulge of muscle, something I recall that simultaneously interested and nauseated me. It's not coincidence that poets define their lives in terms of physical objects, especially those that manifest familiar metaphorical qualities. The fragility of human existence is glass-like, able to shatter under certain pressure, yet for all its thin transparency, it is solid nonetheless. And nonetheless beautiful, for both its surface and shatter, its drama and destruction. How often in films or TV dramas do we see the image of a body flying through a glass door or window, exploding walls of glass, the brilliant, unnatural sounds of it, replicated as a way to mark a climactic moment, a moment of significance, of passion, of change, of finality, of metaphor? How often is it at the same time displayed in slow motion? Visually gorgeous cinematography in contradistinction to the character's obvious trauma. The widower in my poem, if you remember where we started, is considering his hand as a location of home, recounts his scars, which would be numerous, as anyone who's lived or worked on a farm would be able to attest. In doing so, he recounts as well the memories of hidden wounds, what are sometimes called emotional scars. For the first time, perhaps the widower realizes that distance will not remove those, that no matter how different the places are that he visits, cobblestone streets, barge canals, Gothic cathedrals, or how different the people that he meets, his hands will always be a physiological record of his life, a legend, say, of luck and circumstance, of location and occupation. In contemplating our hands, we may see our accomplishments, our triumphs, our accidents, our mistakes, our losses. In such contemplation, may we not also note, beneath the topography of flesh, the poem of our being, moments of melancholy or nostalgia, stories of satisfaction and contentment, even happiness. Scars are, after all, what's left from healing. There are a dozen or more smaller scars on the palm and wrist of my right hand from incidents of boy play and restlessness during the time we lived in the cottage on Platte Lake. Scars from a relatively happy time of a relatively happy childhood. Over the years, I have added numerous other scars, as the book reveals, in addition to countless mental and emotional souvenirs of broken bones and contusions, of heartache and loss, mementos of other times. They are scars, I think now, as much of place as incident.
Thank you so much. You got me a little choked up. Oh my goodness. All right. And finally, we have Scott Russell Morris.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here. As the other authors have said, thank you to Ross and Cornerstone Press for putting this together. One of the main kind of throughways throughout my collection of essays is the relationship of my wife when we were dating and then newly married. And this essay is in the second person addressed to my wife, and it's called Lives Yet to Be Lived. You and I walk through a late spring forest outside Frankfurt, holding hands and chatting. I look for squirrels and see none, but their absence creates a lingering magic. The possibility of the unseen clings to the hidden side of every mossy trunk. We had not expected to be here in these German woods, but our flight was canceled, so a layover became a night in the country. We hadn't expected to end up in Kazakhstan either, but as our year in Central Asia came to an end, it seemed to have gone by so quickly. We'd wanted adventure. You were tired of teaching in American public schools, and I remained unaccepted to graduate programs, so we'd gone to a place few of our friends had even heard of. Kazakhstan had been the glittering unknown, something apart from the humdrum routines of home. But now, as we follow the path through German trees, we discuss the anticipated reunion with friends in America. We'll probably never see our Kazakh friends again, we mourn. We consider the long, deep winter we've left behind as I turn my head to follow a promising sound. It's only birdsong. We sit on a bench and listen. What if we can't have children? We ask each other. I hear something clatter, just a scuffling of stones underfoot, and I am reminded of dry beans cast into kumalak fortune-telling tables in a Kazakh market. You were still recovering from the emergency surgery that removed a tumor from your uterus when we walked the streets of Astana during the early springtime, Nowruz festival. Old women sat on overturned buckets, spilling and sorting red beans in front of their just as elderly querents. The fortune tellers' tables were nothing more than cardboard boxes with permanent marker lines, hardly the decorated Kumalak rugs available to those with money. A friend said it was just a game for old women, but we could see the sincerity in their faces. The fortune teller touched each bean, her wrinkled hands feeling for spiritual signs to guide her bean sifting. The women spoke in Kazakh, not Russian, as though even their tongues would guide them to their roots. Perhaps for us, unbelievers in foreign superstitions, it would have only been a game. But if we had spoken their language, we said to ourselves, we would have sat with them, let them press the beans to our foreheads too, and listened and learned what the spirits of the departed wanted to tell us. As we walk under the green canopy, we also discuss the Kazakh hospital room, yellow walls and blue light, every dim, almost midnight, and you've been in the operating room for hours. They won't let me come down to see you, and I cannot communicate well enough to ask for details. They refuse to give me details, and you wake from the anesthesia fearing you are dying, crying, "Mouj, mouj." And then they finally wheel you to me, your skin pale and freckled like a ripe pear, and despite the nurse's warning, I hold a cup of water to your parched lips, and you choke a little, screaming from pain as the sutured incision in your abdomen. At your admission to the hospital, a stern doctor had said, "You no have babies, no babies." It was the only English diagnosis we'd received until the surgeon, a gentle woman with kind eyes, had said, "I have golden hands," the only English she spoke to us. Then, through a translator, assured us everything would be fine. She assured us the surgery had been successful, we could try for children once you were healed. You cannot talk about the hospital or the operation without tears. Stuck as we were in this in-between, leaving Kazakhstan but not yet home, the future, pulled by conflicting prognoses, weighs heavily on us. Some might say the surgery changed our lives, but I hesitate to embrace that phrase. How can we change a life that has not yet been lived? The expression suggests that one knows what the future holds, or that we might see the timelines splitting and the differences in parallel universes. To say an event changed your life implies that each new day, every decision, does not already change you, that you are fundamentally static unless an outside force intervenes. Maybe my love of the existential makes me curmudgeonly. Perhaps privilege enables me to imagine self-actualization. But to admit that an event, a word, a realization, even a squirrel, can change one's life is to admit that life is merely a sequence of shifting probabilities instead of possibilities. But then again, perhaps the future is as much a part of us as the past. Who we want to be and what we expect to be are as distinguishing features as the memories we carry with us. We cannot change the future any more than we can change the past, but we can mold our expectations and reframe our stories, which is to say, as we rearrange the images of our multiple selves, we shape our present selves. Though it might have been a game for us to play at Kumalak, it is not because we do not believe in the ability to see the future. Raised as Mormons, we believe in the gift of prophecy. We believe in a God of revelations who will yet disclose many great and important truths. But our tradition, constrained further by a dose of secular skepticism, limits that belief to a few select seers, ignoring the gifts of those on the fringes. Still, Mormons say much about a specific, hoped-for future. As our future spanned uncertainly before us, I recalled my patriarchal blessing. A church leader laid his hands on my head and promised me the blessings of heaven in words specific for me. I was just 14, but I treasured those individual promises, a keen mind, an understanding of the will of God, fatherhood sometime yet in the future. I trusted those blessings, let myself be guided by them, perhaps foremost because I wanted them to be true. You were in your hospital room awaiting surgery, and your hospital roommate, 2 months pregnant, though through broken English, said that tomorrow she would learn if yes baby or no baby. In the morning, she came back from the operating room. The no baby had been removed. It was an ill omen, and it feels like yesterday still, but also a lifetime past. a past that presses on the life yet unlived. These trees can tell us nothing, but we continue to watch them. They are quieter and more foreboding than the Kumalak beans. These trees might as well be tarot cards with their esoteric illustrations or horoscopes or blessings spoken with the laying on of hands. Like essays or abstract art, fortune cookies, and palm readings tell us the future only inasmuch as they ask us to consider who we are, who we have been, and who we want to be, forcing us to consider the juxtapositions of so many shapes and shadows, behind which might be the thing we've always wanted. As I look up to check for signs of squirrels passing overhead, I recognize that I'd never known what would happen, but I had hoped for certain outcomes. The knowledge that nothing is sure is what we are aware of now as we cross a pedestrian bridge, a commuter train passing underneath, the forest framing the cloudy sky overhead, and us together in this quiet moment, waiting for tomorrow's flight home. You admire the beauty of the trees and take my hand. The tall trunks of these trees remind me of another forest walk when you were on my mind, and I recall it out loud for you now. I was walking round an English lake looking for red squirrels, but seeing instead bluebells blooming ankle high and the late sun barely breaking through high mists. I was thinking of you, whether or not my future had you in it. I wanted you to see the scene too, because a narrow path lined with purple flowers and wild garlic wound its way through the emerald hillside, a near-perfect illustration of the romantic sublime, a moment I knew even then that wouldn't be perfected by squirrels, but by your seeing it with me, the same way you are now seeing these German trees, our eyes open and aching for any oracular detail, but the answer's right here, where our hands clasped together. Another one of the themes that goes throughout my collection is imagining the lives of people that I do not know. Some of it's like strangers on the bus, people whose names I just encountered on Facebook. And this one is about a little clay pot that I saw in a museum that I worked at. The first time I entered the Museum of Peoples and Cultures a few minutes early for a summer internship interview, I looked over the pottery collection from the long-departed city of Pakme, which, though now a maze of weather-eaten adobe walls and old dust in northern Mexico, was once a thriving cultural center. The inhabitants traded far to the extremes of their world, away from the heart of the desert to the sea, to the mountains and jungles. They worshipped Quetzalcoatl, the plumed serpent, to whom they beheaded macaws on a high sacrificial mound, a mound which, from above, looks like the severed head of the birds they idolized. They played a complex ball game, the rules now lost. The only remains of the game are the eye-shaped ball court and the bones of the losing teams, who forfeited their lives to Quetzalcoatl. Once a thriving community, Pakme was simply abandoned. No violence or sudden drought adequately explains the exodus of its people. The homes, ball courts, sacrificial mounds were already in ruins when the Spanish explored the area. Casas Grandes, the newcomers called the ghost city, big houses. As I considered the pots before me, the ancient world seemed so impossibly distant. I thought of the hands that shaped the clay, painted it with red and black snakes, birds, toads, and geometric lines no human can now decipher. Displayed with the larger pots were several tiny ones, the bowls of which were no bigger than a thumbprint. At first, I smirked at the small-shaped clay. These minuscule pots were so insignificant beside the great city's other remnants, yet they displayed themselves as proudly as their elaborate companions. I imagined how such mini pots must have been made. No doubt a little girl's hands had once graced a lump of clay, her mother's discarded remnant, and squeezed it between her fingers, feeling the cool, moist clay mix into the warmth of her skin. She pressed her thumb into the ball and pinched the sides. Her mother, forming a pot shaped like a warrior clothed in jaguar skins, smiled at this attempt, remembering her own beginnings. Before the mother took the pots to the kiln, she rounded out her daughter's little creations, making them symmetrical and even. With the clay and the fire, the little girl waited until finally, the pots came out covered in ash and burnt a deep red, the color of macaw blood and desert mud. The mother showed the daughter how to polish the pottery. Rub with these burnishing stones. Smear it with this gritty slip. Yes, yes, now scrape it. Pull it back to smooth it. Scrape, smooth, scrape. During the evening meal, the girl talked only of her vessels. Her father pulled the lump of baked clay to his eyes, admiring it, telling her that it was the finest pottery he had ever seen. He smiled at his little girl and then looked up to catch his wife's gleeful eyes and winked. "These we will display for the world," he said, and placed them on a shelf near the door. After the next cleaning, the girl stowed the pots in the woven basket that safeguarded her other treasures: a white snakeskin from the dry wash, a copper bell her uncle brought from the south, a blue and red macaw feather, the tooth she lost the previous week. The day her parents told her that they were leaving the city, the girl packed her treasures first. No, the mother said. There is no room in the pack. There will always be more snakeskins where we are going. There will be more macaws. We will make more pots. There is always more clay. And a few hundred years later, the Spaniards stood in awe, pausing in search for the golden city to contemplate this dusty urban skeleton. What touched them most about the remnants and ruins? Did they sit in the wall's shade, sipping tepid water, looking over their shoulders for ghosts? Did they celebrate Mass among the earthen remains? And which of these pots did they also touch, adding to the ancient clay their own intangible legacy? Did they imagine a little girl weeping, as I did? Surely she wept more for the loss of these tiny treasures than for the city itself. She had merely inhabited the city. It had always been there. But she created this pot from nothing but clay. She must have felt the smooth clay between her fingers one last time, then one last time again, before reluctantly returning it to the place with the bell. Did she know? Surely she knew that her little thumbprint pot would remain as cities crumbled, as the ages of men passed, as empires rose and fell. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right. So now it is time for our Q&A portion. So I'll start us off with a question. Will you guys think of some? So my first question for you all is, how would you describe your writing process?
Good. Okay. Yeah,
We'll
yeah,
share.
we'll share.
We got it.
My writing process, I actually only write outdoors, and I write everything by hand, like pen and paper. I can't write on a computer. Do you guys write on computers? Okay. It's just, even in the winter, I will bundle up. There's something about being enclosed with walls and a ceiling. I just, my thoughts just don't hit as well. So I do all my writing by hand outside, and then my editing process would be when I go to type it. That's me.
I don't have an answer to this, although there are a couple essays in the book that discuss how I write poetry and how I spend more time not writing than writing in my entire life, which is kind of why the book came together the way it did. But currently, I mean, I'm fortunate that I am no longer, I'm retired, so I no longer have to teach, and my kids are all grown, and my grandkids live far away, and so I am able to, and the dog only asks me to walk 3 times a day. So I'm able to spend 3 hours or so every morning at my desk, but I wouldn't call it writing necessarily. Mostly solitaire or something, but
I would say I'm the opposite of that situation. I am still working and I have small children and other hobbies as well. So I write very sporadically and multimodally. I do like typing. I also have a notebook, and almost every essay may not start in my notebook, but even sometimes I might have typed something up first, I'll go back to my notebook because I like that slows you down, and I doodle a lot, and the doodling helps me think as well. So I write where I can, when I can.
Awesome. All right. So, before I ask one of mine, anyone? Yes. Yeah.
Hi. Nice readings, by the way. So, amateur writer myself. I have a lot of times where I get like writer's block. So how do you guys navigate that?
I don't. Like I said, I don't write. I do have an essay in here. I didn't read it, but it's short. It's how I write poetry, and essentially it's a description of not writing. It's doing everything else instead. Like Scott's, when I had kids and things, I never really thought of it as a writer's block, because writing wasn't. I think the writers that have writer's block are the ones that live by writing. That they need to get past some place in order to. Writing was always a part of my life, but it wasn't the be-all and end-all. It was also family and teaching and other kinds of things. And so I never felt that, well, I need to, get past this. There were long periods of time where I didn't write, and it didn't matter. Or I got started on something like a novel that I started in 1973 that I've got to page 103 now, I think. That's never been an issue for me. So it's kind of a non-answer again.
Can I go?
Yep.
I never feel guilty when I do take breaks, and I think sometimes you do have to take a break, and I think those are the moments where it's like the universe saying, okay, go out, you need, gather more material, let things percolate a bit, just observe, and things will start stirring, and I think the most important thing is just not feel guilty if you don't have the words then, because if you write, you're always a writer, no matter if you're writing every day or if you only have time once a month or whatever it may be. But I think reading, just doing others, like listening to music, watching interesting movies, being out in nature, just those things that inspire you.
I had a change of heart on this. A couple years ago, I read Anne Lamott's book, Bird by Bird, which I wholeheartedly recommend if you want to be a writer, because she'll tell you that there's all sorts of good advice in there. But there's kind of 2 main points that she takes, one of which is the title, Bird by Bird, which is you don't have to write the whole novel in one day. You're just writing 1 paragraph today or 1 sentence today. And so, not trying to do everything all at once. That was one. And the other one, I'm going to swear because she swears. And it's the title of the chapter. Is you have permission to write a shitty first draft. And that comes via Hemingway, who's the first draft of anything is shit. That's what he said. And that freed me so much to just sit down and write anything. And you can write total trash. In fact, the very first essay in here, and I talk about this at the end, I could not think of what to write, and I had a deadline because I was in a class. So I sat down and I started writing. I have nothing to write about, and I just kept typing until eventually I thought of something, and I deleted some of it, but not all of it. So if you have writer's block, the way to get over it is to write, but write badly, and it's fine. You can delete later.
I think it should be said that we're assuming when you say writer's block that you're getting started, right? Because it's very different. I have friends who are novelists and they get in the middle of a book and then they are stuck, and that's a whole different. It's a whole different thing. But I don't generally write very long things. I write very short things, so I've never had that issue. But I know that can be stifling at times. But. More questions? Come on, we're easy. Yeah.
Ava, one of our managing editors.
Hi. Who inspires you?
Whoa. Well, you do, obviously. That's a very inspirational kind of question. I guess I'm largely inspired by the people I live with most closely. So, and you know, it was my kids when I had kids, and I read an awful lot. I mean, I read a lot, and that can be inspirational, whether or not it's good writing. You know, I mean, you can be inspired by something that you don't like. Some of the novels that I read for book club, you know, inspire me to not do that. But you know, I think it's people. I'm a very, very strong, very family oriented, and so as it's probably evident in here. So my mother and father were inspirational. You know, my brothers and sisters were inspirational. My kids show up again and again. You know, it's the people really close to me. And then there are other writers that I have known for a long time, particularly in Michigan. And we kind of inspire each other. You know, we kind of feed off each other and in a kind of professional jealousy way, you know. But so inspiration, you're inspired.
Okay, I'll go next because my answer is pretty much the same. I would say my people. You know, like my husband, my kids. I do have some good writer friends. We still have, like, from grad school many years ago, like over 20 years ago, and we still have monthly Zooms and workshop poems. So they are very inspiring. Yeah, I'm just pretty simple. It's just the people I love.
My answers are all very similar. I don't know that it needs a lot of repeating, but I am easily inspired by the simplest of things. So, yeah. Yeah.
Well, they're not necessarily simple things. They're ordinary things.
Yeah.
Which is really different. You know, so. Yes, shout. We can hear.
People online.
This is mostly for the YouTube stream.
Hi there. I was just wondering how you know when a piece is completed, like when you know not to mess with it anymore, not change the language, and you feel like you're proud enough to publish it.
This is another slightly sarcastic answer that was given to me by my professor. So when I was an undergraduate, and this has really stuck with me, your piece is perfect when you have been dead for 100 years. So the other answers, it's yeah, you can't know. Like Montaigne, one of my favorite, you know, the original essayist, was constantly changing his essays in his, like, adding marginalia. Like, it's never really done. It's done when you say it is done.
Did you want to go or you want?
You go next.
Well, I'm going to take a slightly different approach. I spend a lot of time with the work and fiddle with it and fool with it. And the question is, how do you know it's done? Well, I don't really worry about that. When I get to the point where I can't fool with it anymore at that point in time, then, I'll stop. But I've spent a lot of years with the literature. I taught for a lot of years. I've done a lot of workshops and I've done critical writing for, about other texts. And so I have what I think is a good sense of completeness. And so I kind of strive for that. I have this sense in my head of a target for completeness when everything in the piece, whether it's a short story or a poem or an essay, when everything seems to work together. Now, it might not work together perfectly, but if it all seems to work together, that's when I think that it's ready to go out, if that's what you mean by complete. And sometimes I change after that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of have to get to a point where you send it out, and you just have to accept the fact, like, okay, at this point in time, this is what I wanted to say, and this was right. But definitely, I look back at, and I'm like, oh, there's stuff in here. Like, as I read, I want to, cross lines. I want to, I edit constantly. I don't think that ever goes away. But I also just recognize at this point in time, this is what it is. And I'm celebrating that, even if I've evolved from that and changed ideas or, whatever it may be. So I think you just kind of have to learn to embrace that. Otherwise, nothing will get published.
Yeah, I think, again, to kind of give you a non-answer, are you thinking about complete in terms of your sense of completeness, or are you thinking about complete if an editor was looking at it or an audience was looking at it? And that's a whole different thing. There are a lot of I have a number of works that I sent out thinking that they were complete, and editors thought differently, or audience thought differently. But then again, it's a question of whether or not my sense of what's going on, my sense of completeness is if the editor understands my sense of completeness, and then it's a kind of a playoff, and it comes back to the same thing. I go back to the work, and I write a lot aloud, so, and that sometimes tells me whether or not something is complete. If I have read it through and then feel like haven't finished reading it, or something like that. But.
Another more practical thing is to have people you trust that will tell you the truth. Every essay in here that I wrote was workshopped either in a class or among my writing group or with my wife, who's a very critical editor, and reading it out loud to somebody or having somebody else read it out loud to you, not your mom, who will just be like, it's so great, but someone who you trust their opinion, and they sometimes you won't know, but someone else can help tell you what those questions that haven't been answered or what hasn't tied back together is.
It's especially hard when you when you are dealing with intentional ambiguity or tongue-in-cheek, satire and that kind of thing. And then, so you need somebody who can, and so you think it's complete because it seems, you laugh when you write it, but somebody else is kind of looking at you like, when they start asking questions when an editor or a friend starts asking questions, is, do you really mean that? Then you have to go back to it and decide whether that's really what it is. Is it done, or do I have to fiddle more with this sentence because it's not doing exactly what I think it's supposed to be doing? Anybody else have a question that doesn't need to be answered? We can avoid answering.
I think we have time for like 2 more questions. That'll be just right. That'll give us time to sign books. So does anybody out there have a question? If not,
Okay,
Sophie's got a couple.
so my wife asked me after I put this book together, and she's familiar with most of the work. So she asked me, which is your favorite essay in the book? So I would like to ask my fellow writers what their favorite. I'm not going to answer it myself, and I didn't answer it for her, but I think we can ask that question to Casey and Scott without any problems.
Mine's my epilogue. It was just very emotional, and I will never be able to read it aloud because I can't not cry when I read it. So it feels very heartfelt for me. So, yeah.
Good.
I don't know how to answer this question. There's a lot of emotion in a lot of them for me. I don't know. Maybe the least emotional, but that was the most fun to write. I'll just go with that. That's not the question you asked, but that's the one I'm going to answer. So I have an essay called Our Library, which is based on an essay by A.A. Milne, the writer of Winnie the Pooh. He wrote an essay called My Library, and I modeled it after his essay, and I even borrowed some lines and some framing of it. And A.A. Milne is always a pleasure to read, and so to read his essay really, really carefully, trying to see how I could mirror it, was really fun. And it's a very tongue-in-cheek essay. It's probably the one that I tried to be the funniest with. So I don't know if it's my favorite, but it was really fun to write.
Hi, thanks for those lovely readings. Do you work on multiple projects simultaneously, or do you just focus on one project?
I consistently have a list in my journal of all of the projects I either want to do or am working on, so I love starting projects. I have several first chapters of novels that will probably never get written, and a poetry collection, and I also publish zines, and I'm constantly working on new zines, so I am definitely, that's also one of my cures for writer's block, is if I can't figure out what to do with this project, I just jump ship and work on a different one for a while. I also do a lot of visual art, which goes into my zines, so yeah, that's a problem of mine, is the number of projects.
Me? I'm pretty much genre monogamous, and so I tend to, because some things take much longer than other things, I tend to use this time that I have. So that's why I write a lot of very short poems, because I have very short, my dog wants me to go for a walk all the time. It's always interrupting me, and so I try to keep things controlled. But I pretty much stick with, when I'm working on new work, yeah, it's an intentional and intense dedication to that particular piece, because I spend a lot of time, particularly into revision, which I love to do revision. And sometimes I won't get started on something because I'll think, I don't want to have to spend all, weeks on this thing. So, but then on the other hand is, once I have something together, a full manuscript or something, then I can fool with, I can go back and forth if I have a couple hours a day or something. I can go to this over here and that over there, again, in the revision stage, but It's different in the crafting stage, I think.
Oh, I feel like I don't have time to do multiple projects because I feel like my life is very busy right now with kids, starting a business. I have a couple jobs too on the side, and I feel so pulled doing all the life things that I've mostly been focusing on writing poetry because that's like the bit of time that I get. I can, hone in on something smaller, like maybe someday I'll be able to have more time for that.
All right, so that's going to be it for the Q&A, and now we're going to have some books for sale and do a book signing. Yay! So let's give another round of applause for our amazing authors. All right, let's sign some books.